we heard this announcement yesterday from the New South Wales government. Join me live now is the opposition leader, Mark Speakman. Mark Speakman, thanks so much for your time. I know you're a very busy man, so I appreciate the time this morning. I wanted to ask you about your view of this announcement yesterday, and it comes off the back of that AEMO report.
Yeah. Look, I'm not sure I agree with some of the observations you made in introductory comments. I think you said this was to avoid probable blackouts. AEMO, which operates the national energy market, it's the market operator, releases updates every so often predicting whether there's enough capacity in the system for reliability. Its most recent report last week basically said there was basically a negligible chance of blackouts in the next few years. So blackouts at the moment aren't probable. You can't absolutely 100% rule them out, but the chances are negligible. So what the government hasn't done so far is explain what it sees the size of the risk and how much of taxpayers' money it's going to pay, it would seem, to Origin. From a negotiating viewpoint, they've really shot themselves in the foot. You don't tell someone you're negotiating with you need their service and then try to negotiate a price. You negotiate a price before you do that. So they've lost a lot of their bargaining position. We also don't know, is this the most cost-effective way to plug any gaps in the system? You would think you would go out to the market and say, hey, we need X amount of electricity in a couple of years to plug a gap. Who can provide it to us right now at the cheapest price? That might turn out to be Eraring, but the government doesn't seem to have done that due diligence. So at the moment, the government needs to come clean with taxpayers and consumers about what this deal will do to reliability, how much it will cost, hasn't looked at other alternatives, and whether keeping Eraring open that's another question. How long do they want to keep it open? But whatever it is that going to improve reliability, or are we actually going to go backwards? Because this is a coal-fired power station nearing the end of its life.
Yeah.
A lot of the reliability issues we've seen in the last 12 to 24 months have been surrounding unexpected close downs of Eraring and other power stations because of their end of life, rather than the sun not shining or the wind not blowing. So there's a whole lot of unanswered questions that the government has to explain to consumers and taxpayers.
I just want to pick you up on a few of the things that you said there, saying that, there's never not a risk of blackouts, but it was negligible. AEMO said that there was a serious reliability risk in 2025 and 2026. I mean, you're really willing to risk that without doing anything?
Well, what AEMO means, it doesn't mean there is a serious risk of blackouts. It means there is a serious risk of breaching its reliability standard.
Well, what's the difference, to be fair? People need a reliable energy network. If there's a serious reliability question, I mean, that's pretty bad.
Well, look, can I make one thing very clear? Whatever we do here, reliability and keeping the lights on is the number one priority, and affordability comes a very close second. A bit like an insurance company or a bank, they've got to have a margin, a kind of comfort margin, a contingency against risk. And likewise here, the reliability standard is what is just enough to keep the lights open, but what is just enough to keep the lights open and have plenty of surplus in the system as well. So there's already in that reliability standard, there's a huge margin of comfort. What AEMO is saying is that
isn't this from your roadmap? I mean, the quote is serious reliability risk. I mean, the idea of extending Eraring has been whispered and actually talked more loudly about for the last couple of months. I mean, you just said there might be other options. Your government had about a decade to find those other options. Doesn't seem that they're that easy.
Well, can I make one thing absolutely clear? If there is a serious risk of blackout or even any sort of significant risk of blackout, of course you have to deal with it. You can't run that risk of happening. But the AEMO report suggests that the risk of blackouts is negligible. This is a roadmap that's been around for a couple of years. It's a roadmap that the Labor Party endorsed. If they think there is anything more than a fanciful risk, then of course they've got to address it. But you go to the market in an orderly way and say, hey, Eraring is going in 2025. If there is a non-fanciful chance of a blackout, what's the cheapest and quickest and most effective way of dealing with that? And the government hasn't told us that it's looked at other options. It hasn't told us that whether, for example, a gas-fired power plant could be done in a couple of years and would be cheaper, whether someone can provide a battery in a couple of years and that would be cheaper. We just don't know. It may be at the end of the day, Eraring is the option,
Well,
but the government
batteries
doesn't
aren't
seem
on
to have
large
done that
scale,
due diligence.
but do you agree with extending Eraring or not? Because, I mean, those other options, no one in the marketplace has come up with a better option. It's not just government.
They haven't been tested. They haven't been tested. You would go to an
But
option.
what is there? What do you know that we don't?
Well, I don't know. That's the point. The government hasn't told us that it has tried other alternatives.
I mean, but hang on. They've only been in power for the last 6 months, Mark. I'm just trying to establish. I mean, if there were other options, your government would have found them, wouldn't you?
Well, the first point is that AEMO assesses the risk of blackouts as negligible, and even more negligible if any of the uncommitted rollout that's in the pipeline happens in the next couple of years. Second point is if you want to address that risk, you go to the market and you say, hey, who can build a gas-fired power station? Who can develop a battery? Or who can extend the life of their power plant? And the government hasn't done that, it would seem. So if Eraring has to be extended, so be it. But the government has not made out the case. It hasn't made out the case that this is the cheapest and safest and most reliable and most affordable way of doing it. It doesn't appear to have done that due diligence. And we don't know as consumers and taxpayers what the bill is. That work just hasn't been done. So the government needs to be open and transparent about this. Okay, but can I just actually stress, I'm not suggesting we act in any sort of reckless way or take any unnecessary risks. But the risk at the moment appears to be negligible. If nevertheless, despite that negligible size, the government wants to do something, it needs to be open and transparent about the cost and satisfy us that it has looked at other alternatives and ruled them out.
Okay, I know you keep on saying it's negligible, but AEMO also said serious reliability risk. So look, I'll do a little bit more work on that and come back to you. Yeah. Let's talk coal royalties.
It's the difference between the risk of a blackout and the risk of breaching a very high reliability standard that already has a huge amount of fat in it.
Yeah,
that's the second risk they're talking about. It's it's a technical risk.
Yeah, well, they did warn of blackouts in Victoria and South Australia, and we're all connected to the grid, so I don't know what that actually means for New South Wales. But look, I want to talk coal royalties, and we're running out of time. You criticise this deal, and look, you've got your reasons to do so. Eventually, though, are you going to block it in Parliament?
Well, we don't have the numbers to block it. It'll be in the budget bills, presumably. It's not a deal, it's a tax grab, and it's a broken promise. Daniel Mookhey and Chris Minns both went to the election, among other things, promising no increased taxes, no new taxes. This is a $2.7 billion increase in coal taxes. And they're bandied the figure 2.6%. Well, that's the percentage rate, but it represents a 30 to 40% increase in coal taxes. Daniel Mookhey says, well, we haven't had an increase since 2009. The percentage hasn't changed, but the tax take has gone up because the amount of coal production has gone up and prices have gone up. So this is a government that has broken yet another promise, and it's a string of promises. They told us they'd roll over active kids. They've slashed that by 85%. Essential cost of living. But I mean,
that tells you everything. The coal companies are largely on board with this, so perhaps they haven't gone hard enough.
Well, I don't know whether they're on board or not, but it's not a deal. It's a tax grab, and maybe they were fearing something even worse. But
well, they didn't like the cap. That's why.
The fact that the government may have been blackmailing them and threatening them with something even worse doesn't justify this. It doesn't justify a $2.7 billion broken promise.
Yeah. Okay. One quick one. Qatar. What's your view on this? Should the government have another look at this? Would you like to see more Qatar Airways flights into Sydney?
Well, look, as a Liberal, I believe in competition, and competition is the best way to deliver the best service and the best prices to consumers. So the more competition we have in the airline industry, the better.
Mark Speakman, thanks so much for your time. It's always willing. I like it.
Thanks, Laura.